Just wanted to ask before we get started. So how many of you know who Steve Souders is? Yeah, a good portion of you. Good. So he basically started the web performance movement, right? Wrote the high-performing websites book that everybody uses nowadays. So how many of you know that he's speaking right now over in Salon 9? Yeah, good. Okay. So then you all know that he's a liar, right? That's why you're not there and you're here instead. Right? Okay. Yeah. All right. So maybe that's not the whole truth. So the cake isn't completely a lie, right? It's more of a half-truth. So I'm going to tell you about that today. So before I get started on the story and the testing that we did and what we saw, I was going to introduce what my company is because it's one of those companies that you probably never heard of. So I work for Manta, and we are you can visit us at manta.com, but we're a place that you can find small businesses as a consumer. It's also a place for small businesses to learn, to get resources, to have tools, and so on. So we're really a company full of people who are passionate about small business, and so all of our products show that, and that's what we're all about. So just to give you an idea for scale for what we were testing on, so we're not maybe huge in comparison to some of the people that talked here, but decent. So we, 20 million unique visitors per month, millions per day. About 1,000 small businesses join every day. 2.5 million small business members already, and with about 60 employees in Ohio. So, so that gives you an idea for scale. This slide is just to show that we actually have gotten really good over the years at monetizing through ads, specifically with Google ad products. Always outperforming the industry standards and striving to do better there, which is really important when you get into my talk later on. So I'll show you what it means. So here's the page the current version of the page that I'll be talking about. This is the one that we're running the test on. And as you can see, there are a few ads on there, right? And there are some that you can't see because they're below the fold too. But for the duration of this test, we'll be talking about this one ad here, the small text ad there. And the reason we're talking about that one is because it's the most sensitive to change, and it has been the most optimized for both targeting and performance just visually. So let's get into the story a little bit. So it was about 1.5 years now ago that we had the opportunity to completely redo the whole platform from top to bottom. So everything from the architecture to the tools that we used, the languages that we used, and even the way that we worked. So getting more agile as we introduced this product or project, and of course we picked up TDD, which we didn't have at all in the past, and just stuff like that. So really changing everything from top to bottom, from process to architecture. So we got new toys. Everyone's excited about new toys, right? So here's a short list of the toys that we got to choose. So we went through a process of figuring out what was going to be best for us as a company, as what would perform best, all that stuff. We ended up going with a few things. So we got to finally work with CloudFormation for building entire stacks, which is awesome with EC2 instances. Got to use CloudFront as our CDN. Not so happy about that choice anymore, but it was good at the time. So we used for microservices, we used Java with Play, and some of them are written in Node.js. We have Node with Express as our web app layer, and then AngularJS on the front end. We forked Twitter Bootstrap, which has been awesome because it has allowed us to have accurate documentation about what our CSS styles are. We use Kibana for centralized logging, Datadog for metrics, Travis CI and Jenkins, and of course, like I said before, adopting TDD, CI, and continuous delivery. So that's exciting, right? But now, if you look at what we were coming from, you'd be even more excited because we were, of course, in a single data center of servers that were built by hand each, right? So it would take us a month to get a new server into production. We were running a Perl app. You can all clap later if you want. We had HTML and CSS, which we like to say grew organically over time. So when we went back, when we finished the migration and went back and looked at the CSS that we got to versus what we had, the old platform had 200 times more CSS than the new. So just to give you an idea. And of course, like most places over time, custom solutions for everything from client-side apps to asynchronous ad serving, anything you can imagine, right? And with all that, and no test, of course, and with all that, still releasing twice a day. I guess I should say, you guys can stop me at any time to ask questions. Don't feel like you have to hold them to the end, too. So let's talk about the speed improvements that we saw on the new platform, right? So we took one page and we basically took the page that was the highest trafficked, and so the page that we'd have to get right first. So we said, let's do that one first, and then when we finished that one page, we compared the speed between the two. So if you see here, the old is a bit slower, right? And you can see the initial content loading, the blue part, is about 3 times as fast as it was on the old. So we were pretty excited about that. The AdSense stayed about the same because we didn't have a lot of control over that, although you can see the time at which it was ready was moved up, right? And then display ads, I think, were about 50% faster. You can kind of see there the yellow is a little bit shorter than the top. So of course, you're gaining lots of seconds there from having all of your content, including your ads. But what we were even more excited about was this difference here. So those arrows are pointing to where all of the content was visible. Entire page content, not the ads. So with the old, it was basically waiting to get some of those ads, the AdSense ads, until it could render all the content. And the new platform, we were able to do it without doing that. So it was, that's a 2.5 second gap there. So we basically sped up the content delivery by 2.5 seconds, which is pretty exciting. So if you look back now, as we started to release, this is showing from Google Analytics the average page download time. You can see, like, as we release things, these arrows point to where we started releasing sections of the site on the new platform. You can see it was kind of high and spiky over on the left, and it got a little bit down and less spiky when we released the first page, and then the second group of pages, and the third, and so on. Because at each point, that sort of dropped. So it was nice to see that it actually played out for real in the real world once we rolled all that stuff out. So looking at the numbers, of course, we're really excited, right? Everything we've ever heard says if you make things faster, you make more money, people view more pages. Right? Like, that's what we've all heard, right? So we were pumped. Actually, so about the same time, I was sitting in the kitchen at home, and from the other room, my son's room, I could hear he was kind of playing in there. He's 4 years old, kind of playing around, doing whatever, being pretty quiet. And then all of a sudden you hear, "Whoa, I'm amazing!" And so I kind of walk in there like, what is he doing in there? Turns out he's there, of course, shirt off, with his blankie, spinning it around like it was a pizza. Apparently that was amazing. So anyway, so it was good timing because, like, at that time it was showing me that sort of like, okay, yeah, it's okay to feel like you're amazing sometimes, even when you're just making a page faster. So it was nice timing. So then, that same son threw a water balloon at me and laughed in my face. Anyway, so we launched an A/B test, right? We tried to compare the old page to the new page, and we were really just testing that single page, right? So we weren't testing the entire framework because we weren't done with everything, right? We just took one page, we built the platform to support it, we built a page on top of it and tried to test it. And so you would come in as a user and see, if you landed on a company page, which most people do, you would land there and get a fast, snappy page if you're in the B version, and the sort of older page if you're in the A version. But then when you would search or click around the browser, your member profile, whatever else, you'd sort of fall back into the old experience and then sort of jump between the two. We tried to minimize the visual impact of that, so you didn't sort of minimize what impact that would have on revenue, but it was definitely a performance difference between the two. So as you can see, we got 17% less ad revenue from the faster page, which is completely backwards from what we expected to see. So then we entered the, what I like to call the WTF Test and Repeat phase. So we launched a bunch of tests over a long period of time as the rest of the group sort of continued on with transitioning all the rest of the site, right? And so we had to figure out why we were losing that revenue before they got done with implementing the rest of the site so we could actually launch the thing, right? And we wanted to be able to, in the continuous delivery model, we wanted to be able to release things as we got them done, and so it was kind of a rush to figure out what the heck was going on and get to there as fast as possible. So lesson number 1 is, test that. So here's one of the tests that we ran. So again, it's that page. You see the colors are different now because we rebranded recently, but this is the page that we were testing at the time that was the A version, right? And then we would say, so we were testing big things and small things. And here's one of the more trivial things that we were testing. So here's A and here's B. Right? A and B. You guys, which one do you like better? Yeah, B? Well, you're right. B is better. So how much do you think that may have been better? Any guess? 10%? 17%. So that would be nice if it was that, right? No, okay, so it's good. It's 10%, that's pretty close. So it was actually 5%. So changes that small can have drastic changes. I mean, when you're working with areas of the site that are sort of hyper-optimized for, getting people to interact with it or whatever, like you can really, with a pixel, you can get that much of a change. So if you ever ask yourself, should I bother testing? Then yeah, you should test.
That was the ad revenue increase?
That was an ad, yes, right, for 1 pixel. So that 1 pixel, see the paragraph down at the bottom, so shifting up and down just a pixel? Just that much difference in spacing between your content and the ad, yeah, 5%. And yes, it was actually statistically significant if you're wondering, because we get a lot of traffic and so we can kind of test that.
Over what period of time did you see it? Was it sustainable over an extended period of time?
Yeah, so most of these tests we typically run for at least a week, which is usually way more than we need to get statistically significant. So, yeah. I'm sorry?
How many unique visitors?
How many uniques? So we get about 20 million a month. And so for this test, yeah. So it would have been split, it was 50-50. So we were splitting it 50-50 for any of these tests that we ran. So yes.
That's for all pages of this site, not just one specific business, yeah?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Right. Yes. So he said. So the question was it for all pages? And yes, it's for all pages of the site. Well, yeah. When I talk about these tests, they're testing around this template, right? This layout for this particular kind of page. So the company profile in our case.
How many permutations did you try? Did you add like another pixel, maybe up to 5%?
We did a little bit, yeah. Actually, so the reason we added that 1 extra pixel is because we were matching it to the old platform, and so that's where we came up with that particular one. But yes, in the past we've definitely, yes, like try several. If you have enough traffic, right? I mean, the thing is, like, if you aren't getting enough traffic to get significant soon enough, then limit your permutations. But you can definitely try a few because there could be, you could find odd things. So that leads us to lesson number 2, which is don't leave your ads in the dust. And this is kind of tricky because it's not necessarily one that the ad providers are going to help you out with necessarily. I mean, some of them will. So DFP, so double click for publishers, is Google's ad serving framework. They've actually done a pretty good job with speeding that up as much as they could by using GPT. So if you're using DFP and not GPT, you should definitely take a look at that because it's very helpful. It's a way smoother way to render ads, and it also allows for extra things like better async loading and single request mode and all kinds of cool stuff. So the other thing is that when you're implementing the speed improvements, implementing and tracking both it's going to be up to you. You can't rely on the ads. So here's another test that we ran. All right, again, we're trying to, with most of these tests, we kind of switched over to try and match up with what you had on the old site so we could minimize what the differences are between the two and understand what's going on. So this was the first page that we launched, right? On the new platform. So we launched this page where you would request the page and you'd pretty quickly get back this page that shows you all the content and no ads yet, right? And they would start to fill in asynchronously, which is what you would like to see as a user, right? You can sort of start scrolling around, reading content, you can engage before all the ads are there. So that was version A. Now version B, we tried to mimic what was on the old platform, right? And so we did, with the old platform, what you'd see is you'd get this little block of content at the top. It would wait, turns out for 1.5 seconds almost, for the next ad to show up, for the AdSense ad to show. When it was there, we'd show a little more, and then we try to show the next one. So again, 1.4 seconds later, you get some more content, and then all the ads show up. All right, so you either get this experience or this experience. Which one do you think did better on that? B. I hear mostly B, so maybe 1A. It was B, yeah. So again, if you look at this, the time difference was, it was kind of bizarre because you would still, with the ones that were loaded afterwards, you still got them sooner than you would have got them if you were waiting for them, right? But even with that fact, making them wait turned out to have a better add increase. Do you want to guess what that might have been? Yeah, that's okay. I'm not going to tell you anyway. It was, it was sad. So it was a very sad day. Of course, I'm bummed about this, right? Like, why we have to make the pages slower to make more money, right? Which is completely ridiculous and against everything that we just worked for the whole time that we built the page. So I was talking to someone. I was, I'm kind of frustrated that we had to make more money by making the page 1 second slower. So they kind of thought about it for a minute. And after thinking about it, they said, well, why do you care if it's 1 second slower if it's, it makes more money? What's the big deal? Right? To which I said, are you kidding me? That's 1,000 milliseconds. Right? All right. Well, I didn't really say that. What I really said was it was just frustrating that we strived to make the internet better, and then we had to sort of degrade back to work backwards. So lesson number 3, measuring is hard, but do your best. And emphasize your there again because it's going to be up to you to measure that stuff because the ad providers will not give that data to you. Did you have a question?
Did you figure out the reason why, like behaviorally? Was it because they liked the old site? So it was just like a version to change that caused them to like it?
Yeah. So you're saying, did we figure out why it was, why the change, or why the increase by basically matching the old site? And was it just a behavioral change that caused the problems? So there's a lot that went into it. Again, some of it is going to be that, so if you go back to the ad version, the ad difference, right, the blocking versus non-blocking. It's that the ads at that time were so slow, right, that you couldn't just let the rest of the page get there sooner. I think that was one, so that's one theory. Because the page got so much faster, the ads only got a little bit faster, and therefore it felt like there was a longer time before the ads showed up, and then people would move on to something else, right? They would be done. And then there's, of course, so that pixel, I think, is just the kinds of things that you find in testing that it wasn't necessarily old versus new. Because we've seen that stuff before where when we're optimizing, we can see those kinds of changes in pixel differences. And I'll go into a little bit more about some of the other things too as we go on. So you do your best. So one of the problems that we ran into, right, is our old code kind of looked like this. Our new plane looked like an actual airplane, right? An airplane built for one person to sit in, and they did that, right? But with this is, we started by building an airplane for a kid to sit in, and then it ends up being used like this, right? That's kind of how our code base was. And so the trouble was that we're testing across 2 completely different implementations and platforms and architectures and everything else, right? So we were testing not just is this pixel different than this pixel? Is this loading the ad slower than that? It was all new services. It was completely different implementations of Google Analytics, right? Both firing to the same account, but still implemented separately, right? And so when they're implemented separately, you can have differences, right? And then the other thing that you run into is just that it's unpredictable, right? You wrote it a long time ago, it's evolved a lot over time, it doesn't have tests, it's ugly, it's spaghetti code, and you don't really know. Maybe there's an instance where this page is tracking page views twice or something for certain browsers or whatever, and you didn't really know that about the old stuff, but you knew the new stuff better. The other thing is that if pages perform differently, of course you're going to be able to measure them differently, right? Because if you're struggling just to get the content of the user, you're certainly going to be struggling to track the sessions appropriately, right? So again, more data is more data and gives you more stuff that you can look into. So you should really think outside the box when you're collecting here. So one of the things that we ended up doing was, since we were so focused on that AdSense unit, right, we were measuring basically everything we could about that section there, which you don't normally get out of the box, of course. And so we started measuring, how often did they show, what was the targeting, what ads were shown, and then so you end up finding bizarre things like, well, the second ad doesn't show 20% of the time, and then you dig into that and realize that it's based on Google's ad serving algorithm, and You also find out that average user takes 1.4 seconds to load the ad, and it's just lots of things that go into that. So the more data you can gather, the more you'll know, and the more you can fight the problems. And then, of course, don't forget to look at the data. So one thing that we found was, one of the reasons for that 17% drop was that there are 3 services that kind of work in tandem to get the targeting right for ads, right? And we basically decided that getting the company data is important, getting the member data is probably important, getting the ad targeting is kind of important, but more important to get to the page to the user than to wait around forever for that service to respond. And so we found out that by looking at Google Analytics, we could see that the new targeting was less precise than the old. And so we were able to dig down and saw, oh, this microservice that's dealing with combining these 2 things and building the targeting was failing about 20% of the time as well. So added some more servers, and then it was all the targeting was back, and we gained the revenue that was lost by that problem. So I think I have time for this. So this is the point where you get to win beer. So if you want a beer. So along the lines of tracking more data, so we were tracking all this stuff in Google Analytics, and they have the ability to look at demographics. So of course, when we started tracking, I went in to see, is there anything cool that happens there just out of interest? Not to solve the problem, but because I'm interested in it. Right, and so here's a couple of questions. If you can, we'll do it school style, so if you can raise your hand and get the right answer, then I owe you a beer. So we're looking at ads about job openings. So would you say they're clicked by men 25% less than women? Same, 25% more, 50% more? Anybody? 50% more often? Okay. Anybody else? That wasn't it. The same? One more. Keep going. Someone's going to get it for free here. A, yes. All right. I owe you beer. So clearly that proves that men are lazy, right? So another one, bioelectronics. Which one do you think it might be? How much was it shown to people? So I heard a C somewhere. Yeah, it was actually D. It was not shown one time. So this is not one time to women. And this is targeting based on behavioral data that Google has. So it was, that was a little funny. And then my favorite, some maps and directions. Do you think they're clicked by men? Yeah, there you go. Sorry, what? A? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, right, moving on to lesson number 4. So on second thought, forget about what I said earlier. So, okay, so maybe not quite, but what we found after going through, it's been a year since then, right? We've had time to optimize the test. The whole platform is there and stable, and we have better testing abilities, and we're all in a very consistent environment. So we actually see now that turns out that faster pages do make more money, you just have to know which things to make faster and which things to look out for. So for example, we recently realized that our anti-scraping vendor was basically causing most of our users to not get gzip compression on their assets, which is really bad, right? So we fixed that problem and tested it, and that was an 8% lift. So that's pretty substantial, right? Now, if you think back to that AdSense blocking thing that I showed you earlier, we got a 5% lift from blocking at the time, right? Well, we decided to run that test again because we wanted to move away from that and see if we could trade in that AdSense revenue for more pages for visit, more return visits, like something that we could say, it's worth the trade-off, right? Because it's clearly a better user experience. So we tested it again, thinking it would lose. This time we got a 5% lift from going back to the async version, right? And by doing that, we got a 20-point increase on our mobile Google Page Speed Insights score, which is important sort of today because of the rollout of that mobile update. So again, 5% increase from that, where we saw a 5% decrease before. So basically, don't be afraid to go back and test things again once you're in the state, the final state, right? The current incomplete state doesn't necessarily kind of behave the way that the final state will behave, right? So what would I do differently if we went back? So I said before that we sort of degraded pretty quickly to trying to match the old and figure out the differences. I think I would have not done that next time and just kept the optimizations that we had made and moved from there to try to make up the difference instead. Because as you see, like when we go back and test them again, we basically have been losing 5% revenue for the past year because we didn't go back and test that hypothesis, right? So again, if you're done, go back and retest once you're in the final state, just to be sure. I wouldn't wait to improve on the speed even more. I'm a kind of a speed enthusiast, so that makes sense for me. But I think it makes sense for the business too, and we really should have been more aggressive about continuing on with the improvements that we had made during the migration. And then maybe the most important one for me was actually to have more faith in our testing. So for me, I don't know, it was very, very frustrating at the time that we were, one thing that we experienced when we launched the new site is that the first page that someone came in, so they would come in on a copy page, and the first page that they would land on, whether they're A and B, the new site would get more sessions, right? So it seemed like we were exposing it to more people, and we would make more money off that first page in the new site. But since we weren't that confident in the testing itself, right, we were sort of saying, well, it's probably getting sessions because we're not accurately distributing the traffic between the two, right? And so therefore, let's normalize the revenue that we're getting by session, right? So we can say, take the total revenue divided by session, you get revenue per session, and look at that number. And so what was happening is that we're kind of shortchanging the new stuff because it was actually getting more people to look at it, right? But and tracking more people and getting ads to be seen more. But we were sort of saying, well, let's normalize it down to be like the old one, and that's when we sort of it was more of a loss than it really was. I mean, it looked like more of a loss than it really was when we were looking at. So I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to talk about one other thing that we experienced and that I consider more of a theory at the moment, because we haven't had a chance to actually test this. So I call it latency tolerance. I don't know if that's a real word somewhere, but I just made it up for this talk. So like I said, the first page was getting more money than the rest. But when you factored in, so we then took that revenue and chopped it up a little bit more because we were normalizing it for sessions. And then also, if you looked at the number of revenue across the entire visit, right? So they come in, we could make more money off the first view because we were seeing that thing. But then once they bounce to like the browse page and then back to company page and so on, like we track them through the whole session, that entire visit was making less revenue, even if you didn't normalize for sessions. So that was kind of bizarre, right? You wouldn't really expect that. If you get more on the first, you should be able to get more on the rest of them, right? Because it's still the same, mostly the same snappy page with some other slower pages in between. So we came up with the theory that basically the first page sets the tone of the speed for the site, right? And so you come in on the new platform page, remember, it was that one page inside of the old ecosystem, right? So you come in, you get a really snappy page, you search, it would kind of delay a little bit and then show you some results. But you might bounce by that time because you've sort of thought, this is a fast, snappy page. There must be something wrong. I'm going to go, right? But for the people who were already seeing the slow experience to begin with, they introduced that from the beginning and set that tone. People would be comfortable and willing to sit through that time because it feels normal for the site, right? And so anyway, that's my theory. So hopefully I'm going to be able to test that at some point. But if someone else gets to it first, let me know, because I think it could be interesting. So in summary, there are no stupid tests. Don't leave your ads in the dust. Measure things that no one else is measuring for you. And testing in a partial state doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as testing in the final state. So I don't know if how many of you have done talks before, but my hardest problem was like narrowing down what I wanted to talk about and getting it into 30 minutes. So if you want to talk later about any of these things, how we get it to be as fast or anything else on that list, I think I'm going to be in the community lounge probably 2:15 and on for the most part, because I'll be at the AngularJS one and then the speed one after that. So if you want to stop by, let me know, or hit me up on Twitter too, and we can talk. So here, if you want my slides, there's a link there that's looks like work from home people, but that's just by coincidence. So I'll publish those quickly, and you can check them out there if you want. So thank you, and please be responsibly.